You're not even her real granddaughter. My father's voice was thick with rage, his face twisted in a way I had seen many times before, but never directed at me so openly. Only blood relatives deserve the family fortune. I stood frozen in Grandmother Rosalind Hartwell's study. The tall oak shelves lined with leather-bound books surrounded us like silent judges, witnesses to a cruelty that felt unreal. This room had always been my refuge. Now it felt like a battlefield. My grandmother had been buried only 3 days ago. And already, the family was tearing itself apart over her will. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "Don't play innocent, Alyssa," he snapped. "Your mother's little secret isn't a secret anymore." He paced across the patterned rug, stopping beneath my grandmother's portrait above the fireplace. Her painted eyes looked calm, almost knowing. "Rosalind cared deeply about bloodlines," he continued. "Once the lawyer confirms you don't have Hartwell blood, you'll get nothing." I forced myself to meet his eyes. "Do you promise," I asked quietly, "that only blood relatives deserve grandmother's inheritance?" "Absolutely," he said without hesitation, lifting his chin with that familiar air of authority. "I'll make sure the Hartwell legacy stays with real Hartwells, not imposters. My name is Alyssa Hartwell. I'm 27 years old, and until 5 minutes ago, I believed Charles Hartwell was my biological father." Standing in my grandmother's Georgian mansion outside Philadelphia, I was apparently learning otherwise. All I wanted was fairness. My grandmother had spoken to me directly about her estate. She had called me her only granddaughter, said she wanted me protected. Standing in my way was the man whose approval I had chased my entire life, and never earned. "You can attend the will reading next week if you insist," Charles said dismissively, "but don't expect anything. I've already spoken to Gregory Bennett about challenging any provision that includes you." Gregory Bennett. The family lawyer. His closest ally. "I'll be there," I replied. "Grandmother wants me there." "Sentiment," he scoffed. "Rosalind always had a blind spot for you. Fortunately, the law cares about facts, not feelings." He turned and strode out of the room. I sank into my grandmother's desk chair, my fingers tracing the smooth wood where she had written letters, reviewed documents, and finalized her will. The room still smelled faintly of her perfume. My phone buzzed. "Mom, we need to talk tonight." Alone. A cold knot formed in my stomach. If Charles wasn't my biological father, then who was? Growing up as a Hartwell meant privilege and pressure. The Hartwell fortune, built on pharmaceuticals and strategic investments, had supported generations of luxury. Charles, the elder son, was positioned as the unquestioned heir. His younger brother, Daniel, had always been different, brilliant but restless, leaving the family path to pursue medical research on the West Coast. My memories of Uncle Daniel were warm. He laughed easily. He listened when I spoke. My memories of my father were not. Charles measured worth in success and obedience. My brothers, Mark and Julian, fit his mold perfectly. I never did. No matter my achievements, I was always too soft, too unfocused. Only my grandmother had truly seen me. "A Hartwell makes her own path," she used to say. Now she was gone. And the truth she had hinted at was finally coming for me. As I left the study to meet my mother, one thing was clear: the storm my grandmother had warned me about had finally arrived. My mother was already seated when I reached the cafe. It was her favorite quiet place, tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop, far from the polished world of the Hartwells. For once, she looked like she belonged here. Small. Tired. Human. I never wanted you to find out like that, she said the moment I sat down, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. Your father had no right. So it's true? I asked softly. Charles isn't my biological father. She closed her eyes, nodded once, and tears spilled over. Yes. The word felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. It's complicated, she continued, her voice shaking. More complicated than Charles made it sound. Over the next hour, my mother unraveled a story that rewrote my entire life. Before Charles, there had been Daniel Hartwell. They had fallen in love young, deeply, recklessly. Daniel was brilliant and curious, already talking about medical research and changing the world. When he received a prestigious fellowship on the West Coast, they agreed he should go. Long distance, they told themselves, was temporary. But distance stretched into silence. Loneliness crept in. And during a difficult time, my mother whispered, I made a mistake. Charles had always admired her. He was steady, present. And when she was most vulnerable, he stepped in. It was brief, she said quickly. And the moment I realized my heart still belonged to Daniel, I ended it. Then came the pregnancy. I knew, she said, pressing her hand to her chest. I knew it was Daniel's child. The timing matched perfectly. But by then, Daniel was engaged to someone else. Charles insisted the baby was his. He proposed immediately, presenting marriage as the honorable solution. He said it would protect everyone, she said bitterly. You? Me? The family? What she didn't realize until later was that Charles's motives weren't only emotional. The Hartwell inheritance favored legitimate heirs. Charles needed a wife. He needed children. And I needed stability for my baby, she admitted. So I agreed. The secret stayed buried. Daniel eventually returned to Philadelphia, married, then divorced. He threw himself into his work, drifting further from the family. He never knew. Did he ever suspect? I asked. She shook her head. No. I couldn't do that to him. And as the years passed, it felt crueler to tell the truth than to keep it hidden. Everything suddenly made sense. My father's distance. My uncle's warmth. My grandmother's quiet protection. Why is Charles revealing this now? I asked. My mother's expression hardened. Your grandmother's will, she said. He's terrified she left you something significant. This is his way of cutting you out. But if I'm not his child, you're still a Hartwell by blood, she interrupted firmly. You're Daniel's daughter. That makes you Rosalind's biological granddaughter. No matter how Charles spins it. The irony made my head spin. The man trying to erase me might have just strengthened my claim. What do I do now? I asked. She reached across the table, gripping my hands tightly. That depends, she said. Do you want justice? Recognition? Or simply what your grandmother intended for you? I didn't have an answer yet. The betrayal was too fresh. The implications too vast. But one thing was already clear. I would not allow Charles Hartwell to rewrite my life for his financial gain. That night, as I drove home, one name echoed in my mind. Daniel Hartwell. If the truth existed anywhere beyond secrets and whispers, it lived with him. And tomorrow, I would go see him. Daniel Hartwell lived nothing like a man born into one of the most powerful families in the state. His house sat on a quiet street near the university medical campus, modest, clean, and filled with books instead of luxury. No gates. No marble floors. No Hartwell crest engraved anywhere. I sat in my car for a full minute before knocking. What if he slammed the door? What if he already knew? What if this destroyed him? The door opened before I could overthink it further. Yes, he said, peering at me over his glasses. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He tilted his head slightly, studying my face. I felt it too, the strange familiarity.
Are you ready?
The same grey-green eyes. The same small scar above the eyebrow. I'm sorry to bother you, I said earnestly. My name is Teresa Hartwell. I was expecting him to talk. Something shifted in his expression. Hartwell, he repeated. You're Charles's daughter. I swallowed. That's complicated. He hesitated, then stepped aside. Come in. The living room smelled faintly of coffee and antiseptic, like a hospital corridor. Framed research certificates lined the walls, along with photographs of medical teams and award ceremonies. No family portraits. We sat across from each other, silence stretching thick between us. How can I help you? He asked gently. I took a deep breath and told him everything. About my grandmother's death. About Charles's accusation. About my mother's confession. By the time I finished, Daniel's face had gone pale. That's impossible, he said quietly. Your mother and she never said, I know, I replied quickly. She never told you. She thought she was protecting everyone. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. The timing, he murmured. It would, yes. It would make sense. He looked at me again, really looked. My God, he whispered. You look like my sister did at your age. The words hit harder than any accusation Charles had thrown at me. I never wanted anything from you, I said. I just needed to know the truth. Daniel stood and walked to the window, staring out at the trees swaying in the afternoon breeze. I spent years wondering why my mother favored you so openly, he said slowly. Why Rosalind was so protective. Why Charles seemed threatened by you. He turned back, his eyes shining. She knew, he said. Didn't she? I nodded. I think she always did. A heavy silence settled. Then Daniel did something unexpected. He laughed, softly, brokenly. All these years, he said. I believed I had sacrificed everything for my career. Turns out, I lost a daughter too. Tears blurred my vision. I don't want to take anything from you, I said again. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled me into a hug. It was awkward at first, unfamiliar. Then his arms tightened, warm and solid. You're not taking anything, he said firmly. You're reclaiming what was stolen. When we finally pulled apart, he wiped his eyes and straightened. We need proof, he said, slipping into a clinical calm. DNA testing. Legal documentation. Charles won't back down without it. I figured as much, I replied. And Alyssa, he added, his voice firm. If Charles wants a war over bloodlines, he's picked the wrong battlefield. As I left his house, my legs felt weak, but my spine had never been straighter. For the first time, I wasn't fighting alone. The Hartwell estate felt colder than I remembered. The long driveway was packed with familiar cars, luxury sedans, black SUVs, polished and imposing. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension and perfume, quiet conversations cutting off the moment I entered. Every head turned. Charles stood near the fireplace, flanked by my brothers Mark and Julian. Their expressions ranged from smug to openly hostile. Well, Charles said loudly, the prodigal daughter decided to show up. I ignored him and took a seat at the long conference table. At the far end sat Gregory Bennet, the family attorney, his briefcase already open. To clarify, Gregory began stiffly, this meeting concerns the reading of Rosalind Hartwell's last will and testament. Any disputes will be addressed afterward through proper legal channels. Charles smirked. Assuming certain people here even qualify as beneficiaries. I met his gaze calmly. Gregory cleared his throat and began reading. The early portions were predictable. Properties divided among Charles and his brothers. Trust funds reaffirmed. Charitable donations listed in meticulous detail. Then Gregory paused. I leave my private medical research archive to my son, Daniel Hartwell. Charles stiffened. And, Gregory continued, my controlling shares in Hartwell Biomedical are to be divided as follows. My heart pounded. 30% to my son Charles Hartwell. 20% each to Mark and Julian Hartwell. A murmur rippled through the room. And the remaining 30%, Gregory said, adjusting his glasses, to my granddaughter, Alyssa Hartwell. Silence crashed down like glass shattering. That's impossible. Charles exploded, slamming his fist on the table. She's not even my daughter. Gregory raised a hand. Miss Alyssa Hartwell is legally recognized as not quite right. Charles smirked. And my mother is very clear about bloodlines. Gregory remained composed. Which is precisely why Miss Hartwell's portion includes an addendum. He slid a sealed envelope across the table toward him. My mother is manipulating me, Charles hissed. She always favored you. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter written in my grandmother's elegant script. Alyssa, if you are reading this, then Charles was already trying to remind you. Blood is not always defined by marriage certificates. Truth has a way of revealing itself when greed becomes too loud. My throat tightened. Attached to the letter was a document, sealed, notarized, dated years earlier. A DNA test. Daniel Hartwell listed as my biological father. Charles's face drained of color. This is forged, he stammered. She was senile, she was thorough, Gregory interrupted coolly. The test was conducted privately, verified twice, and legally binding. Mark shifted uncomfortably. Julian looked stunned. Gregory continued, furthermore, Rosalind stipulated that any attempt to disinherit Alyssa based on misinformation would result in a redistribution of shares. Charles swallowed hard. Meaning, Gregory said, that if Miss Hartwell is challenged, Charles's share will be reduced accordingly. For the first time in my life, my father looked afraid. I folded the letter carefully, my grandmother's words burning into my chest. I hadn't asked for this war. But she had prepared me for it. As the meeting adjourned, Charles leaned close to me, his voice venomous. This isn't over, he whispered. I will destroy you before I let you take what's mine. I met his eyes steadily. You already tried, I said quietly. And you failed. The confrontation at the will reading had left the room buzzing with tension long after everyone departed. I stepped out onto the terrace, the autumn air crisp against my skin. Philadelphia's skyline stretched before me, and for the first time, it felt like the city wasn't oppressing me with memories of my father's disappointment. It felt like a place of possibility. James caught up with me, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one, his expression unreadable. They won't give up easily, he said. I know, I replied, staring at the distant streets below. Charles won't rest until he finds a way to strip me of this. But I have proof now. DNA, notarized letters, everything my grandmother prepared for this moment. James nodded. Still, you need a strategy. Charles may act irrationally, but he also has resources. Legal teams, influence, and he's desperate. I don't want to wait for him to strike first, I said. I need to be proactive. If he challenges the will again, I want him to lose before he even starts. We spent the next few hours mapping out every possible angle. James had meticulously reviewed the Hartwell Trust documents. Every clause, footnote, and addendum was noted in a spiral-bound notebook. The key is the bloodline requirement, he said. By definition, Charles can't legally claim the main trust. He's adopted. That's your leverage. I frowned, recalling the revelation about Douglas, Charles. He had spent decades insisting on bloodlines to exclude me, never realizing he didn't meet the requirement himself. It's poetic justice, I said softly, a bitter smile crossing my lips. All this time, he thought he was protecting the legacy. Turns out, he's the outsider. James leaned back, considering. Exactly. But remember, he may try underhanded methods. Unauthorized DNA tests, coercion, bribery. We need to anticipate everything. I shivered, imagining the legal battles that could erupt. But I refused to be intimidated. My grandmother had left me the tools to protect myself, and I would use them wisely. Over the next few days, I coordinated with Bernard Walsh, grandmother's personal attorney. Bernard was elderly, but sharp as ever, his experience in high-profile estate disputes invaluable. Together, we prepared a formal filing, a challenge to any claim Charles might make under false pretenses. The document meticulously outlined the adoption records, the DNA verification, and grandmother's explicit instructions. Meanwhile, I reached out to my brothers, Mark and Julian. Though wary of their father's temper, they agreed to meet privately. I don't know how to feel about all this, Mark admitted. Dad, he's always been a hard man. But you have every right. Julian nodded in agreement. We'll support you if it comes to that. Blood or not, you're family. It was a small victory, proof that Charles's influence had limits. Then came the unexpected. One evening, I received an anonymous tip. Charles had been attempting to contact Bernard directly, trying to coerce him into delaying any filings. The message included copies of emails and phone logs. My blood ran cold. He's desperate, I told James over the phone. And dangerous. James's voice was firm. Then we act decisively. We file tomorrow. No delays. No hesitation. Charles thrives on fear. Don't give him that. The filing went through first thing in the morning. I felt a weight lift, a sense of empowerment unlike anything I'd experienced. For once, I wasn't just a pawn in the Hartwell legacy. I was an active participant, shaping the outcome. That evening, I sat in my grandmother's study, her letter and DNA documents spread before me. I imagined her watching, proud of my determination. The room felt alive with her presence. Her voice was going across time. Trust your instincts, Alyssa. Not everything is as it appears. And now I understood. I wasn't just fighting for an inheritance. I was reclaiming my identity, affirming my place in the Hartwell lineage. Charles may try, but I was ready. The game had changed, and for the first time, I held the cards. The morning of the second reading arrived, colder than the previous week, and the mansion seemed even more imposing under a steel-grey sky. I parked my car in the familiar circular driveway, heart steady but mind racing. James was already inside, reviewing documents with Bernard. I took a deep breath, recalling my grandmother's words, "Trust your instincts, Alyssa. Not everything is as it appears." I needed to be sharp, composed, and ready for whatever Charles would throw at me. The dining room was filled with relatives, some curious, others openly hostile. Charles sat at the head of the table, a smug smile plastered across his face, clearly confident he could still manipulate the outcome. My brothers, Mark and Julian, sat beside him, visibly uncomfortable but silently supporting me. Bernard called the room to order. We are here to finalize the distribution of Eleanor Hartwell's estate. Before we proceed, we must address questions raised regarding the eligibility of certain beneficiaries under the Hartwell Trust. Charles leaned forward, exuding authority. It has come to our attention that Alyssa may not qualify under the bloodline provisions. I have documentation proving she is not my biological daughter, and therefore ineligible for inheritance under the trust. A murmur spread through the room. I could feel the eyes on me, weighing me, judging. I stayed calm, retrieving my folder of evidence, including notarized DNA tests and Bernard's confirmation of Charles's adoption. I laid the documents on the table, the weight of certainty grounding me. Let's examine the facts, I said, my voice steady. Charles was adopted by the Hartwell family. The trust requires bloodline descent from Harold Hartwell. By that standard, Charles does not meet the criteria. However, I am the biological child of James Hartwell, Harold's direct descendant, and therefore the rightful bloodline heir. The room went silent. Charles's confident smile faltered. James stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. The documents presented here are verified. This is not conjecture, it is documented fact. Furthermore, Eleanor Hartwell anticipated disputes over lineage and specifically restructured her personal estate to ensure her bloodline heirs were protected. Charles's face reddened. He opened his mouth to protest, but Bernard interjected, cane tapping the floor for emphasis. Any attempts to contest these findings must comply with legal protocols. Unauthorized DNA testing or coercion of witnesses will be deemed invalid. The evidence before us today is sufficient to establish Alyssa's eligibility under the trust. I watched Charles shift in his seat, the anger barely contained. His voice rose, shaking with frustration. This is outrageous. I raised her. She lived as my daughter. I acknowledge your role in her upbringing, James said, his tone respectful but unwavering. But the trust and grandmother's wishes are explicit. Bloodline takes precedence over perception. Mark and Julian exchanged glances with me, their silent support emboldening me. The room's tension was palpable, a storm contained within these walls. Bernard continued, reading from Eleanor's letter. Alyssa, my granddaughter, know that your bloodline connects you to the Hartwell legacy. Stand firm in the face of challenges, and truth will prevail. The words felt like a shield. Charles's face was pale now, the fight draining from him as the implications sank in. Harrison, his legal ally, remained quiet, unable to dispute the facts laid before him. James concluded, in accordance with the trust and grandmother's explicit wishes, the estate's primary assets pass to me, as the surviving biological child, and to Alyssa, my daughter, as her rightful bloodline heir. Any claims outside these parameters are legally null and void. The room seemed to exhale collectively. Relief, shock, and a quiet satisfaction hung in the air. Charles finally stood, rage contorting his features. You'll regret this. I won't be denied. I trusted you to honor bloodline, I said quietly, looking him in the eyes. You did not. That was your choice. Without another word, he stormed from the room, leaving a trail of tension in his wake. Harrison followed, his credibility shattered. I sank into my chair, exhausted but triumphant. James placed a hand on my shoulder. It's over, he said softly. Yes, I whispered, the weight of the past weeks lifting. For now, it's over. The sense of justice was profound. The inheritance wasn't just material, it was the affirmation of truth, the restoration of family bonds, and the validation of my identity. As I looked around the room, I realized that the greatest victory wasn't the estate, it was reclaiming the life that had been denied to me by secrecy and deceit. I had won more than money. I had won my place in the Hartwell legacy. The mansion was quiet now, a calm after the storm that had consumed the past weeks. Charles's departure left a hollow echo, his threats reduced to impotent anger. The tension that had gripped every room during the will reading seemed to dissolve into the polished hardwood floors and velvet drapes. James and I lingered in the study, surrounded by grandmother's books, letters, and artifacts, a sanctuary I had long associated with safety, wisdom, and understanding. The knowledge that I was finally recognized as her blood granddaughter filled the space with a warmth I hadn't realized I'd been missing. "You've handled yourself admirably, Alyssa," James said softly, pulling a leather-bound journal from the shelf. "Grandmother would be proud." I smiled faintly, exhausted yet relieved. It doesn't feel like just me who won. It feels like everything she wanted for me, justice, acknowledgement, and a sense of belonging, has finally been restored. He nodded, his eyes reflecting a mix of emotion I couldn't yet name. There's still much to repair. Relationships, trust, even the family dynamics. But now, we can start building something genuine. I glanced toward the window, where the last traces of autumn sunlight lit the courtyard. The mansion, once a symbol of division, now seemed like a place of possibility. I realized that my grandmother's foresight had extended beyond her lifetime. She had set the stage not just for inheritance, but for reconciliation and the truth to prevail. Over the next few weeks, life began to normalize, though nothing would ever be the same. Charles retreated from public life, his attempts to manipulate the estate now legally and socially untenable. Harrison Mills quietly resigned, his reputation irreparably damaged. Meanwhile, James and I began the delicate process of redefining our relationship, father and daughter, not just by blood, but by choice and connection. Mother approached me one evening, her eyes soft with relief and lingering guilt. "I should have told you sooner," she admitted. "I wanted to protect everyone, but in the end, you deserved the truth." "I understand now," I replied, embracing her. "And I'm grateful, for the truth, for grandmother, and for you." Mark and Julian, my brothers, adjusted to the new reality with surprising grace. They were tentative at first, unsure how to navigate their father's absence from the narrative of our family. But over dinners and casual conversations, they began to see me not as an outsider, but as the sister they had always known. Slowly, laughter returned to our family home, small moments of warmth bridging decades of distance. Professionally, I made a conscious choice to honor my passions. With grandmother's support and newly secured inheritance, I expanded my historical preservation work, founding a foundation dedicated to protecting heritage sites nationwide. Each project felt like a tribute to her memory and a celebration of the life she had envisioned for me, a life defined by curiosity, integrity, and courage rather than obligation and bloodline. The greatest transformation, however, was internal. I no longer measured my worth by Charles's approval, nor allowed the shadow of his cruelty to dictate my identity. I had survived deception, manipulation, and family politics. I had discovered not just the truth of my lineage, but the strength of my own convictions. One evening, as James and I sat together in grandmother's study, reviewing old letters and photographs, he looked at me with a quiet smile. "We've been given a second chance, Alyssa," he said. "Not just with the estate, but with life itself." I nodded, feeling the weight of years lift from my shoulders. We have, I agreed. And this time, we write our own story. As the sun set over Philadelphia, casting golden light across the mansion's courtyard, I realized that the true inheritance was not wealth, nor property, nor social standing. It was the discovery of family, identity, and the courage to claim one's rightful place in the world. For the first time in my life, I felt entirely at home, within my family, within myself, and within the legacy of the Hartwell name. The past was behind me, and the future, wide open, awaited with endless possibilities. Justice had been served, truth had prevailed, and a new chapter had begun. And for the first time, I could say with certainty that this life, my life, was truly my own.